What's up, YouTube? It has been quite a long time since I've made a video. Been almost probably a year by this point. And the reason for that is because of this. This is where I'm working now. Got a lift, a little space, got a toolbox and all that, which is currently slightly broken, but I'm working on fixing that. Excuse the mess. It's a little cluttered right now. I got some stuff here and there. I haven't really had time to clean it. I've been super busy lately. I made an Instagram account just for this, and that's kind of been my business lately. I've been doing a lot of work for people, and I haven't really had time to make any YouTube videos, but today we have this. I have a Snow Performance methanol injection kit and some stuff to go along with it. Now, none of this stuff over here is part of this kit. I am going to go very in-depth of installing this. This video is probably going to be pretty long. Videos you can find online cover like 70% of this, but there's still those couple little things that the information's kind of hard to find. I found most of what I was looking for, but it really took me a while of digging on the internet and YouTube and reading through the comments. So I figured I'd make a video on the entire process, really in depth. Like I said, it's probably gonna be pretty long, but I'll try to make it so it has like labeled segments. That way you guys can kind of skip around if you don't want to watch certain parts of it. But we're gonna get into it. We're gonna start by opening up this box here, and then I'll go over some of the other stuff on the table. All right, so this is the Snow Performance Stage 2.5 kit. Comes with hose, tank, pump, everything you need. So right here we have the VC50 controller. It's a circular gauge style controller. You get your boost on there and you can control everything from right there inside the car. What's nice about this is that it's a progressive controller. So if I set this to start injecting methanol, say 5 PSI, 10 PSI, and then I set my max at 20 PSI, it will progressively come on at whatever you set it at and finish at 100% whatever you set it at. Which I really like that about this. So that way when you're not really getting on it, or even just getting on it a little bit, it's not injecting a ton of methanol into the car. So that was kind of a big selling point for me. Also the fact that this one comes in a nice circular gauge. And I have this here, which I'll get into in a second. And then here's your tank. I believe this is a 3/4 of a gallon tank. Not too sure. So this is the pump. It's got nice rubber mounts on it. Also has flow direction, which is important. And then to the side here, we just have, you know, the level sensor. You got your nozzle, comes with 2 of them. Some 90-degree fittings, the check valve with the adapters for the nylon hose. So that's what comes with the Snow Performance. That's pretty much everything you need. There are a couple extra add-on things. I had to buy a solenoid, which I'll explain why I had to buy the solenoid once we get into that part of the video. But for now, we're gonna move on to some other parts here. This is specific to my car. I have an Audi with a 3.0 engine, the Supercharged. So this here is a boost tap to connect to this hose here. So this knows how much boost the car is making at any given time. That is vehicle specific. Depending on the car you have, you don't necessarily have to get a boost tap. You might just be able to put a T-fitting into the original system. Now these are some fuse taps to power the gauge. Got just a kit of them because I always use these, so I just figured I'd buy a whole kit. This is also something you didn't really need, but it's connectors, waterproof connectors, anything from 1 pin to 6. This is something that wasn't really a requirement, but I'm going to use it regardless of whether I'm using it on this or other stuff, so it wasn't a big deal for me to buy that. And then this here is where we're going to mount the gauge. Now, you don't have to get 3, obviously. I have 2 more gauges that I'm going to be putting in, which I'll show in a later video, but this we have to mount in the car. And this we'll get into, that's for under the hood on my car, the way it's set up. And then here we have the boost juice, which is the water methanol that we're going to be filling this up with. Now before we start installing this, I'm going to pull the car in. We're going to kind of make sure we like where we're going to be putting these parts before we start cutting up the hose and the wires and getting everything ran. Kind of want to have a plan of what we're going to do. So let's bring the car in and get started. All right, so we got my car in the garage. This is my Audi A6. It's been on the channel before. It looks a lot different than it used to. I have to make a video showing all the stuff I've done, but I've been making a lot of my own forged carbon fiber parts. Did the entire interior. Headliner's redone, and this material, it's kind of hard to see on the headliner, but it's like a snakeskin Alcantara with this like weird like pattern on it. Forged carbon fiber side skirts, rear bumper skirts, spoiler, front lip, headlights, everything. For those of you who aren't interested in installing this part, you can go ahead and skip right over this. I'm gonna get this in the car and mocked up before I even start messing with this stuff. So I'll try to put a timestamp somewhere in so you can skip ahead to just the installment of that. But we're gonna get into this. So it's a little dark in here, but hopefully you can kind of see. That's about where I'm gonna put it. We're gonna pull this A-pillar out. We're gonna pull the fabric off. And then once that's off, we're gonna mark where we wanna put this. All right, so we got all the fabric off and I put it back in there so I can put this up in here and kind of move it around, up, down, sideways until I get it somewhere where I like it. And then I'm going to draw a line around everywhere it sits, and then I'll pull it back out of the car and we'll start cutting into that and fitting this onto it. All right, it might be hard to see with all like the other pieces of fabric, but got everything marked out. We're gonna cut this section out, refit this into it. I think I'm gonna have to trim this, I think I'm gonna have to trim that corner off, but we're gonna get this cut open first, fit it back in, and then trim it as we need it. And then we're gonna plastic staple and plastic weld it onto this piece. Okay, so we got the A-pillar cut, or what's left of it. And we have the triple gauge pod. Did cut this edge down a little bit, and then that corner, instead of cutting it, I actually warmed it up with a torch and flared it out a little bit. And it's pretty damn close to where I want it. Yeah, it's a very crude lineup, but kind of get the idea of how it fits in. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start by plastic welding this in this corner, get that corner lined up, and then move down. We're gonna put a bunch of plastic staples. Then we're gonna come back through with plastic weld to really like secure this. Then we're gonna come through with a nice thin layer of Bondo around this whole thing. And then we're gonna make these carbon fiber. So that's the plan. We're gonna get to that plastic stapling and I'll show you guys what that looks like when we're done. All right, so we have it mocked up. You can kind of see there, I use plastic hot staples. Just put one pretty much in each corner. Put one there, one here. And that's enough to, you know, hold together. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna put it back in the car, make sure everything looks good before we go any farther with this. It's definitely gonna need some work. You guys see we got a gap there, and I don't really like how that sticks up, but I couldn't fit it any other way. So if anything, I'll trim that corner off and put some like fiberglass mesh over that, or heat it and bend it. We'll see what we have to do. But first things first, we are gonna make sure this lines up in the car. So everything fits up. This corner we're gonna have to do some work on, but that's not a problem. I'll figure that out outside of the car. All I wanted to know was that the way I had this set up, it's definitely gonna fit. So now that we have it mocked up in here, I think I'm gonna throw some of those hot staples in, because I did notice that this piece moved a tiny bit now that it's in the car. The rest of it stayed pretty much where it's supposed to, but if I put a couple of those hot staples in now, it should. So we got all of the plastic staples in, and it's, you know, nice and strong now. For this corner, I actually took the torch and I just heated it up and took my fingers and kind of like pinched it and like moved it to where it needed to go. If you wanted to keep this with like this kind of like factory textured look, I don't know if you can really see it, do not do that. Really made it pretty ugly, but for me it doesn't matter because I'm going to be putting Bondo on this, and then after that a layer of forged carbon fiber and epoxy. So For me, this was no big deal, but if you would like to keep this the way it is, do not heat it up. So now that we have all the staples in, we're gonna trim all these excess pieces, and then we're gonna get plastic welding rod, and we're gonna weld the entire backside. Then we'll move on to the Bondo. All right, so we got the plastic welding done. You can kind of see it on the outside, see it better on the inside. I use like a kind of an adhesive filler rod and soldering iron basically, but kind of see it in there. I only did the areas where there's gaps because between the staples, the areas that I fill with the gaps, and the Bondo, it's not gonna need any more reinforcement than that. But at least now those gaps are filled, so when I put the Bondo on it, it'll be a lot easier to kind of press it into the crack and not have it just kind of push through. So we're gonna get a layer of Bondo on here and sand it, and I'll show you guys what it looks like once everything's smoothed out. All right, so we got everything covered in Bondo. We're gonna sand it back. It doesn't have to be perfect as long as it's pretty close to straight, because the forged carbon fiber will make up for any like little pits or anything like that. So as long as it's kind of the shape I want, that's all we're looking for on this. Okay, everything's sanded now. It's looking pretty good. It's not perfect. There's some, you know, little bit of low spots. I'm not too worried about fixing it because like I said, this is gonna be getting covered in forged carbon fiber, which is very forgiving for low spots and all that. If this was, say, maybe we're gonna do this in regular carbon, I'd probably make that look at least a little nicer. So we're gonna get to putting the forged carbon fiber on it and epoxy, and I'll show you guys what it looks like when it's done. All right, we got all the carbon fiber on. I have a layer of peel ply to kind of hold everything together while the epoxy dries. You can kind of see the carbon and the purple flake through it. It's not, you can't see it too well because of the peel ply, obviously, but tomorrow, once this is hardened, I'll peel all this off. I'll show you guys what it looks like, and then we'll throw a second coat of epoxy on it. All right, we got this whole thing sanded after about 2 or 3 coats of epoxy. It's got a little bit more work to go. I got to start bumping up the grit. This is sanded with 40. You can see there's some pretty heavy lines in it, but it's looking pretty good so far. We're gonna bump this all the way from 40 and move our way up to 1,000, and then we're gonna get some clear coat on there. All right, so we got the gauge pillars all done. They're clear coated. I don't know how good that looks in the camera, but they came out really good. A couple small imperfections, but it's going inside the car, so you're really gonna barely see it anyways. So we're gonna let this dry, and we're gonna get started on installing the actual kit. First thing that we wanna do is get a plan going. Got the A6 in here, got the hood open, got everything we need in front of us, and we're gonna start figuring out where we're gonna put the tank, the pump, solenoid, all that stuff. So I'm thinking about removing this here and replacing this with a mesh and sitting this tank somewhere in there, and then the pump next to it. And while I'm at it, I'm gonna make a custom bracket to hold this. This is a coolant tank for my supercharger. I have a divorce system, so the engine and supercharger do not share coolant. So that was kind of a temporary setup for testing. But now that I'm gonna be in here, I'm gonna make one bracket that holds all my parts. We got the bracket mocked up in there, but before we weld, obviously you wanna put a blanket down to cover your paint, any other things in the engine bay. I have a flame-proof blanket over the windshield, and it tucks down under everything I'm working on. That way, no risk of anything catching on fire. We don't damage the paint or the windshield with welding spatter or cutting, whatever. And you also want to disconnect your battery before you start welding. So you see I get it welded there. I reused the factory mount on that side, brought a piece of angle iron over to this side. There was already a hole here, so I just drilled a hole in the piece of flat stock and curled it to like follow this the hood mount here, and I welded the angle iron to that so it's removable. And then we got these here for the tank and the pump, another one. So we're gonna get to mounting all these up. I think I'm gonna mount everything on the pump. I'm gonna weld bolts from the backside so I don't have to hold a wrench and put the nut on at the same time, just for ease of working on it. Once we have the bolts tacked from the backside, I'm gonna hold it in the car, tack it with the tank. That way I know exactly where I want it. And then we'll pull the tank and the pump, everything that you don't want to get messed up, away, and we'll weld everything completely. All right, so we got the bracket made. And then this over here is for that coolant tank for the supercharger. So that's not anything to do with the kit, that's just something extra I had to add on. But the way I designed this, so I can put the tank there, and then the pump is gonna share the bolts with the tank, and it'll sit right here. And the reason I did this is because you want your pump inlet to be below the lowest point of your tank. So say your pump was up here, it would have to suck the water up. You want it to just flow into the pump nice and easy. So we got the tank here. Before we get any farther with putting any fittings in it, first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take a drill bit here, and we're gonna drill our hole for your level sensor. It needs to be a 7/8 hole, and then when we tighten it, this rubber is gonna swell and create a seal on the side of this tank. So I had plenty of room over here to mount this. I think I'm gonna go right on this line, so it's in between these two bolt holes, so I don't have any issues tightening them up. It's also about 1/3 of the tank-ish. That's just where I'm choosing to put it. You could put it at the absolute bottom, you could put it halfway, whatever suits you. I feel like having it at 1/3 is perfect for me, just because when the light comes on, you'll still have a little bit in there to give you time to either pull over somewhere and add some, or when you stop, just add some. So we're gonna get on that, and then we're gonna bolt everything to this bracket after we paint it, and then just put it in the car in one piece. Okay, so we got the pump and tank mounted up on the bracket I made. We painted it. I got the hole drilled for the level sensor. So as you see, I have the pump lower than the lowest point on the tank. That way the water meth can just siphon out and into the pump. The pump doesn't have to pull it from the tank. So I came out really clean. I reused these two holes to mount the pump, and it just looks really nice and neat. So we're gonna start by putting this level sensor in. You have to make sure that that little arrow, I don't know how well you can guys see that, but that arrow has to face down. So this is gonna normally be floating, and then as the liquid comes down, once that closes, the sensor will read that it's down, and then the light will come on. If you have it this way, it will work, but it'll work opposite. When you fill it, the low light will come on, and when it gets low, it'll go off. So you definitely want to make sure you have it this way in the tank. Make sure the arrow, like I said, is facing down to the bottom of the tank. So we're going to put this in. It's a 24 wrench on this part, and then I'll probably just use a 10 on this side to hold it, so I'm making sure I'm holding that arrow facing downward. And this rubber gasket here will collapse into that hole. Make sure you blow out your tank with air after drilling the hole. You don't want any shavings getting into the line, even worse, getting into the pump. So make sure that's fully cleaned out before you put anything on it, like the fitting, cap, sensor, anything. You want to make sure it's completely empty. Okay, so now that that's in, we're going to connect our tank to our pump. Now, your kit comes with these fittings. For me, obviously, I'm going to use the 90 here and the straight here, but depending on how you have your setup configured, maybe you want to use them in different locations. But for me, I'm putting the 90 like this, so it shoots right over to the tank, shoots over to the pump, and then the straight is going to go here. Now, you cannot use Teflon on these. The water meth will eat away at that. There is a special sealant, E6000, that comes in the kit. I'm going to be putting this on all the threads, on all the fittings. I believe some of them you don't need to put it on. I'm putting it on everything because I don't want this to leak on me. So you need E6000. If you buy the kit, it comes with it, but it can't hurt to have extra. I'm going to try and make just this amount work. It should be okay. All you need is a tiny little bit. You don't need a lot. So we're going to get these parts in there, and then I'll show you guys how to put the nylon line on this end of the fitting. Alright, so I'm going to throw this clip in a little earlier in the video because I forgot to mention this before. But when putting on your E6000, always put it on the male side of the threads. If you put it in the female side of the threads, it could end up when you thread it on, just pushing it deeper into here instead of on the male side, it's just going to get forced downward, which is what you want, towards the outside. You don't want it to get forced inside and clog up your system. So like I said, I'm going to throw this clip earlier before we start getting into the plumbing. That way you guys don't mess up and put it on the inside, always on the outside. So we have our little piece of hose cut to connect our two fittings here. So you want to make sure when you cut the ends of these that you cut them straight. When you're cutting them with a pair of cutting pliers like that, it's kind of easy to give it like an angle on it. You want to make sure it's nice and straight because you're going to push it all the way to butt up against these threads here. And before you put it on, you want to make sure you have your fitting clamps, I guess you could say, on there and facing the right direction. See the thread facing this way and this way. All right, so I got the camera set up, so hopefully you guys can see this. You're just gonna take your line here, push it, wiggle it all the way until it butts up against that fitting. And then we're gonna do the same down here. I actually cut this piece a little too short, so we're gonna remake this one real quick, just about an 1/8 inch longer. But you wanna make sure that you have enough to reach to the end of each fitting. All right, so we're gonna put our fittings back onto the hose that I just cut. Get the fittings on. I'm gonna slide this one all the way up. That one's all the way on. We'll move those out of the way. Then we're gonna have to bend that a little bit and wiggle it on to this one. All right, so now we got that on. I don't think you need the E6000 for these threads because the nylon seals on them. I'm just gonna put a tiny, tiny little bit just in case. Can't hurt to have it. So just a tiny little bit. Do a little there. And when you thread these on, it'll kind of mush the rest of it the way it needs to go. So we're gonna get a wrench, tighten this up, and then this is all ready to go. And then when you're tightening down this last one, I'm just gonna hold this so we're not putting pressure on the plastic tank. Get it nice and snug. You don't gotta go crazy tight. Tank is connected to our pump. We can move on to this side. This side is going to get the same fitting as this side. Just going to thread into here, and then we're going to connect our nylon hose and run it to our solenoid. Okay, so we got the bracket mounted in the car. As you can see, we have the tank here, the pump next to it. It's not bolted down right now, it's loose, but what we're going to do next is we're going to figure out from all the way down there how we're going to run the line to come up to the motor. But there's two things that run in that line before we get to the motor. This is a check valve. As you can see, there's an arrow on it to tell you which way it flows. This comes with your kit. I believe you install this right before the nozzle at some point. This does not come with the kit, but I purchased this separate. It is a Snow Performance solenoid. And the reason I need it is because I'm going to be injecting my water meth behind the throttle body. If you were to hook up everything without the solenoid, the vacuum from the engine running could pull the water meth through the system and into the motor when it's not supposed to be injected. The solenoid is going to, you can see right now you can't see through it, so the solenoid is going to close when the system is off and open when the system is supposed to come on. That way, when the engine is in vacuum or anything like that, that fluid cannot make its way into the motor. Now, there's two things you could use a solenoid for. On my setup, I'm using it so the engine doesn't siphon anything in, or you could use it for a dual nozzle setup. Now, some people will have their water meth injecting somewhere in their intake tube, and then have a secondary injection that only comes on at like max boost behind the throttle body. I'm only doing a single, doing it behind the throttle body, which is why I still need a solenoid. And we'll get into the wiring for this when we do all the wiring. There is 2 different ways to wire it depending on how you're using it, as I just said, whether it's for dual or single, but we'll get into that when we do the wiring. For now, we're gonna start running these lines, get it from the pump to the motor. So I think I'm gonna mount the solenoid right there. It comes with this nice little bracket. So I'm gonna drill a hole, mount it there. That way I can just run the line kind of like in a loop around and have it come into this side. And then it'll come out right here, and we'll bring it around with these hoses, because these hoses go to the back of the supercharger, so the line will kind of just follow these, and we can just kind of like zip tie them all together and make it look nice and neat. So we're gonna pull the bracket off real quick, drill that hole, mount the solenoid, and I'll probably just run the line outside of the car. It'd be easier to get to that. And I'll probably also put the line on this side outside the car, and then I'll just cut it wherever I need to cut it out here. Got the bracket mounted up on our bracket, I guess. So we're gonna run the line from the bottom of the pump. I'm gonna kind of come around like this and run it into here. Now on these solenoids, you are able to, you know, turn them where they mount here. You can loosen this nut up and you can kind of point the wire whichever way it wants to go, and this doesn't matter. There is it's upside down, sorry. In and out, so you have to make sure you have that correct. So we're going to spin ours this way because it's going to come in here and then it's going to come out around the pump and kind of go through there. So we're going to get those lines ran. I'm not going to show you that because you already saw it on here. It's the same process, same everything. So we're going to get that hooked up, then we're going to get the fitting on this side and run the line here, and we'll just leave it long and we'll cut it as we need it. All right, so we got this line ran around to the solenoid, and then we have our outline here, which I left extra long because we're gonna put this back in the car and kind of route it where it's gonna go, and then we'll find out where we're gonna cut it once it's up here. While it was out, I also drilled some holes in the top there because I bought these Christmas tree end zip ties. So I'm gonna run all the wiring along the top of this so it's nice and neat. But we'll get into the wiring after all the lines are ran. So we're gonna throw this back in the car real quick, and then we'll figure out where that line's gonna go. Okay, so with the bracket in, you can kind of see how I was gonna run this line. It's gonna come out with these, and these go all the way here and here on the back of the supercharger. So we're gonna route that line through there, and I think I'm gonna put the check valve right around here. That way it's accessible to see if it's, leaking or anything. I just don't want to like bury it under the intake tube here. So I'm gonna figure out how much hose I need. I'm gonna cut it. We're gonna put the check valve in line there. And then I'm still waiting on the plate that goes behind the throttle body. It's supposed to be here today. Maybe it still will be, but if not, I'll just kind of throw this, I'll make a clip whenever I put it in, and then we'll move on to the wiring, obviously. Okay, so we got that ran, we got the check valve hooked up. It's not hooked up on this side yet because I still have to pull that bracket in and out maybe 1 or 2 times, and I don't even have the injection plate yet. So I'm gonna leave that for the very last, but the way it'll look on the camera, I'll just, whenever I put that in, I'll add that clip in. The meth injection plate finally came in. Got the throttle body pulled off, and there's a plate that was already in there from the factory that's about the same exact thickness as this. So this came with 2 gaskets, came with new bolts, but I'll probably just reuse the OEM ones because this is about the exact same size. The only thing we're gonna have to do is kind of remove or grind out some of this bracket here, because where I'm gonna put this up here, you can see the hole is kind of blocked. So we're just gonna kind of round out this area here, and then we'll be able to install everything. All right, so we got the bracket shaved down. Looks nice and clean. That should give us plenty of room. I'm gonna hit this with a little bit of spray paint just so that doesn't rust. But while this is drying, we're we're gonna start putting together the plate with some of the fittings. All right, so here's where you thread in your nozzle. So whether you're using a pre-manufactured plate or you're making your own, you always want to make sure your nozzle is going to be 90 degrees to your intake, whether that's in a silicone intake, metal intake, whatever you're doing, right? So I'm going to be using the number 6 nozzle. That should be good for 475 to 600 wheel horsepower. I think I'm somewhere in the range of a little over 500. I'm not 100% sure. So we're going to start out with this one, and if anything, I'll just limit how much comes in on the controller. So of course we're going to put our E6000 on this, and we are going to thread it in this way. The filter always faces away. You do not want the filter facing in. Always filter on this side. So put your E6000 on, tighten this down, and then we're going to put our 90-degree fitting right here, like so, all with E6000, and we'll get that together with the nylon hose fitting, and we'll have it in the car. Got the check valve back there, got the hose hooked up all the way to the throttle plate. I have some rags here because I'm going to test the system. I'm going to prime it, and I don't want to prime it in the motor obviously because it's not running right now. So we're going to test it out right here, and hopefully the rags will catch any too much overspray. All right, so I'm going to go turn the key on, and I'm going to hit the prime button. So as you can see, everything's sprayed out the way it's supposed to. Pump pushed all the air out. So now we are good to install this part. All right, so you can kind of see it back there. Got the plate, got both gaskets in there, the hose, which we're gonna find a spot to zip tie it up where it's not gonna rub on anything or break and all that. So we're gonna test fit that bracket that we trimmed out, make sure it clears that real quick. Get everything bolted back on that. Then we'll finish zip tying up the feed line and we're done. Okay, so we're gonna start the wiring process by doing the gauge first. We're gonna get the wires through the firewall and into the engine bay. Then we're gonna wire everything together up here. So these two gauges have nothing to do with the kit. It is only this one. This is the controller, the 2.5. These are just going to be temperature sensors for coolant system for my supercharger. So those have nothing to do with the kit. We're only focused on this. So on this controller, we have purple, red, green, yellow, and black, along with a hose, which is your boost tube. So you can get a boost reading off of your supercharger, turbo, whatever you have. Red and black have to go obviously ground, and this is a 12-volt switched power source, meaning this is something that's going to turn on and off with the key. These do not have to go through the firewall. The purple one is for your tank level sensor. That has to go through the firewall. The green is the power for your pump. That has to go through the firewall. And the yellow is only needed if you're running a dual nozzle setup like I talked about earlier. I am not going to be doing that, so I'm probably just going to wrap this wire up somewhere in here. I'll leave it somewhat long. If I ever do want to do that, I can always tap into it, but this is not going to be used for anything. All right, so it looks like an absolute mess right now. This is going to get cleaned up. I have a lot of wires. These are all for those extra gauges. All of that is for the extra gauges, but we're just here to focus on the snow performance gauge. So right here, I have my ground, which why it's yellow, I don't know. I had some other wires ran for other things that have since been removed, so I'm just reusing the ground that I already had. I tapped power off of this fuse here with a fuse tap and a 20 amp fuse. So I have my red wire going to power, black wire going to ground, and I have it wired. So now when the key goes on, you see the snow performance gauge light up along with the other ones. So you see all the gauges are on, now the key's on. I gotta mess with the colors on all of them. I haven't done that yet. I just got it wired up to turn it on. As you can see, the snow performance gauge is working. So it's on to the next 4 items, which are the boost tube, your power for your pump, level sensor, and the optional dual injection solenoid wire. Now for me, I'm just going to cut this one in here, tuck it back, and that's that. The rest of these three have to get run through the firewall. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to tape the ends all together, and I'm going to take a thin metal rod with a sharp point on it. I'm going to poke it through the boot, and I'm going to work its way all the way up through there, and then we'll run all the wires over to the pump, tank, and solenoid. So I cut the yellow wire and I put a piece of tape over it, just in case this decides to send any power to it. It's not going to, you know, arc out or on the frame or none of that. So I'm just going to tuck that back there with some of these other wires, and that one is out of the way. So now we are on to just the purple, green, and the hose. And along with that, I'm going to run all these wires for my sensors all through at once to make it nice and easy. I am going to put a electric connector, probably like right here or somewhere along this line. That way, if I ever need to remove this, I don't have to worry about the wires being solid ran. I can just unplug it. That's how I did this. There's all plugs in there. All of these are going to get plugs. That way I can just unplug everything, and this is easily removable. So we're going to get to doing that. I'll show you guys what it looks like when it's done. So we got a connector on here now, so if we ever have to remove this, we can easily unplug it. At some point I will be getting like a barb fitting for this, so that way I can also disconnect this, but for now we're going to have to just run it the way it is. I can always just open this panel up, snip it, and put the fitting in real easy, so I'm not too worried about that. So this is going to get tucked back there like that, and then we're going to run everything under the dash here, and I'll do my best to show you guys under the dash. It's going to be pretty hard too. I have to take some stuff out up top here so I can see where I have to go, and we're going to get all three of these run through the car. Alright, so we got the ECU and the fuse box pulled out to reveal that rubber grommet down there. Looks a little nasty down there, but it's just silicone from previous wires that have been run through. I have LED fog lights and an ethanol sensor, so that's what that's for. So I actually took a welding rod for a TIG, and kind of see I took dikes and I cut like a nice sharp point on it, so this will poke right through that rubber real easy. So we're going to take it, we're going to poke it through, and then we're going to pull it through from the inside of the car. So you can see here with that rod fully through the gasket down there. If we go to the inside of the car, you see it's right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all the wires that we need to run through, and we're going to tape them to this rod. And what I like to do is actually put a little bit of grease around the tape, especially when I'm going to be pulling through like 10 wires. So I'm going to put a little bit of grease around everything that's going through. That way as you pull it, it should just slide. And then we'll wipe that up and put some silicone around it to seal it back up. Alright, so I'm going to do my best to show this. The lighting isn't great, but do what we can. What I like to do is I like to wrap the tape. Tuck these up here. I like to wrap the tape around the rod first. That way you have some strength when you're pulling through. Come back this way. Alright, now we're going to start with our first wire. You want to stagger all your wires, especially when you're pulling this many through. So we're going to start with, but now that we wrapped this little piece of tape, we're going to start with our first wire. And we'll just kind of stick that there, wrap it up all the way up to the front of it, and kind of just start bringing it back. And then we'll start with our second wire, like, you go like opposite of it, whatever. Probably a little farther down than that, right there. That, and then throw this in there, that boost tube. I'm I'm gonna put some grease on this. That way when I pull it through, this is gonna get really tight with the rubber. So we have a little bit of grease on here, it'll just help it slide through. I'm gonna pull this through. Hopefully all goes well. I have everything greased up, so it should slide. So let's see what happens. So it seems like the grease did the trick. Everything is all the way through. So now what you're gonna wanna do is, and this will go for any car, you wanna run the wires in here, plug everything in, then pull it as far as you can. Still having a little bit of slack inside the car, but most of it being out of the car, that way we can put it to where it needs to go. So I already have all my wires pretty much ran where they're gonna be. I'm just gonna plug them into where they go, tuck them back, then I'll pull that until there's very little slack inside the car. All right, so it's starting to look a lot cleaner in here. We have everything run along the sides here. Everything goes under. We got no more wires sagging down over here. Everything's pulled through. These few wires go to the under part of the dash itself. And obviously there's a cover that goes here, but we're not gonna do that quite yet. We're gonna get everything in up front put together. So you can see we have all the wires ran through. Our boost tap here. My one complaint about this kit is they really could have given us some longer wires. I mean, I ran that from, right there on the A-pillar down, around, and out, and this is as far as I got, and I didn't cut anything off of it. So personally, I think they could have, I think this is maybe like 5 or 6 feet. They definitely could have given us like 10 to 15. I think that would have been a little better, but it doesn't matter. We're just gonna solder some wire on here. I think I'll probably take everything, run it up to here, and then run across this piece until we get over there. The boost tap is gonna come outside this. You see this plastic thing, there's a cover that goes here. So I think the boost tap we're gonna run out here, and we'll bring that around and then to the back side of the blower. Now this part is not something that comes with the kit. It's not a requirement, but it's definitely something I like to do. Got some wire loom here. I like to wire loom all the wires. So we're gonna do that to all of them, and then we'll tape around where these will come out on their own. And we'll run all of these up front for that, which is separate obviously. So let's get the wire loom on there, and I'll show you guys what it looks like. So we got the silicone on there. Got the start of the wire loom. I didn't do the rest of it yet because I want to put this back down. Before I do that, I'm gonna grab those little bits of leaves there. So we're gonna put the fuse box back in, put everything back together, and then we'll see how much we're working with up here, like for wires and all that. And then we're gonna run everything to that side. All right, so we got the ECU back in. I don't have the washer tank in yet, just because I have to work in here. Why Audi puts the washer tank on top of the ECU? You can see there's already some dried washer fluid on it. I have no idea. It doesn't seem like a very smart idea to me, but I don't know. Gotta extend these wires. There's no way that's gonna reach over there, obviously. I'm gonna continue green with green. Unfortunately, I don't have purple, so we're gonna have to substitute that with yellow. So once we get over there, just remember that when I say yellow/purple, it's just the purple wire, but this is all I have to work with. So we're gonna get these soldered up, get them in the wire loom, probably run a separate wire loom to that side for these wires, and we'll go from there. Okay, so we got these soldered, got the heat shrink on them. We're gonna run everything through the wire loom, and then we're gonna split off from this one and run a second wire loom this way. So we're gonna get to that. I'll show you guys once we have all the wires on that side. So we're working in a little bit of a mess here, but it's getting late and I just wanna get this done. So now we're gonna wire everything on our bracket. We have the level sensor, the pump, and again, like I said earlier, don't have to have this part depending on your setup, but we are gonna also wire in the solenoid. Now, if you were running, and only if you were running a dual nozzle setup, you would wire this to the yellow wire coming off the gauge. We are going to be wiring it to the yellow wire that I ran to extend the purple wire. Please bear in mind that the purple turned into yellow, the green stayed green. I had green wire, I did not have purple. So, each 3 of these things have to be grounded. On the level sensor and solenoid, they don't have any polarity, so you can ground either wire, it doesn't matter which one you pick. On the pump, on the other hand, you have a positive and you have a negative. Obviously, black is your negative. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna wire all 3 grounds to a common ground right here where it bolts into the car. That way that'll keep that nice and neat and clean. And then the other 3 wires we're gonna route to our harness. Now for the way I have my car set up, that I needed a solenoid because remember my injection point is behind the throttle body, so the vacuum could cause suction to siphon this through when it's not supposed to, which is what the solenoid's for. Now what I'm gonna do is wire my solenoid in with my pump. So when the pump receives a signal to turn on, the solenoid will open as soon as it gets that signal. When there's no signal, the solenoid is in the closed position. When it detects voltage, it's going to open at the same time the pump kicks on, nice and simple. And then obviously our 1 wire will go to our purple wire for the level sensor. All right, so we got the whole setup going on here. I got it on the ground so it's a little easier to see. Got the wiring harness run, connector, our common ground. So the solenoid, the black wire on the pump, and the level sensor are all grounded to that bolt. And then I spliced the red wire and one of the wires from the solenoid together, and they're going to the connector. And then 1 wire from the level sensor comes to the connector because, like I said, the solenoid and the sensor have no polarity. You can use either wire for positive or negative, it doesn't matter. So we're gonna get this back in the car, get everything hooked up. We'll test what we can right now. I'm still waiting on that plate that goes behind the throttle body. We're gonna put this in, hook everything up, and see how it works. Okay, we got everything hooked up. Let's see, I already primed it, tested it. So to prime it, all you have to do is, with everything on, press this button. You could hear it coming out. Bracket system is really good, it's really sturdy. The gauge came out really good. I'm really happy with the way everything came out. Everything looks nice and seamless, there's no wires everywhere. Still gotta put this back together, but yeah, that's pretty sick. All right, so now we're gonna install the boost tap. Now, this is specific for my car. It is a part that goes on the supercharger. You can see where those 3 bolts are, 1, 2, and 3. It was like 30 bucks, nice and easy. Depending on your setup, there is a T-fitting that comes with the Snow Performance kit, and you can find a vacuum line somewhere or something that's gonna read boost pressure that you can tap off of. This car, I don't know if it has one or any of these lines. I think they're all vacuum. They could be boost, I really don't know. But for 30 bucks, I figure I'll put it right there. It's a nice accurate reading. So we're gonna install this. I had to get some fittings from the hardware store by me to connect this extension because Snow Performance did not give us enough line. Mine is right here. I have a pen in it to stretch it out a little bit because I couldn't quite get it over those fittings easy, but with the pen in there, stretching that hose out a little bit, I should be able to slip it on. And then we got that little extension of hose which we're gonna run through here, around, into there. So first thing we're gonna do is get that boost tap plate in, and then we'll run the hose. So boost tap is in. You can see the little nipple sticking off. We're gonna run the hose. We're gonna connect it there and kind of run it through everywhere it has to go. We'll get it onto that, and then that's it for the boost tap. So this is the little fitting we use to attach the cat decided to make an appearance. So this is the little fitting we used. It's the smallest one I could get from my local hardware store. It's pretty tiny. I mean, it's maybe like an eighth. We did have to stretch it to get it on here though. As you can see, it's a little bit too big. I ended up using my mini torch, just warming it up and then kind of carefully forcing it over. And now that it's cooled, it's pretty much followed the shape of it. We'll let her inside. Come on, Rocco. So now we have this hose, which we're going to run around to our supercharger boost tap. Okay, so we got everything in the engine bay put together. Got our nozzle, check valve, you can't really see, but it's down there. All this stuff you guys already saw. So it's pretty straightforward. It was a pretty simple install as long as you follow the directions and the wiring and all that. It really just depends on your car of how you're going to fit it and how clean you want to make it. This took me extra time because I was filming it. I was really putting effort into making it nice and clean and not just like a mess everywhere. But when you go in the car and you turn the key on, the key off, obviously the gauge is off, key on, and the gauge turns on. So let's go through the settings here. The button that says P is for the prime. You don't need to press this once it's in the car. You don't want to press it once it's in the car because it's going to shoot a stream of water meth into your engine, and if it's not running, you definitely don't want to press that. So moving to the next screen, this is our injection start. You usually want to start your injection at 40% of your boost. My car makes about 18 to 19 psi at peak boost. Sometimes I've seen it hit 20. So we're going to go with 18 as our max. So my max is 18, meaning 40% of that would be 7.2. So I'm going to set mine to start at 7. And then we're going to move to the next screen. This is injection full. This means it's at this PSI, it's going to be injecting at 100%. Now, I have mine set to 25. I think I'm going to leave it set a little higher because the number 6 nozzle is good for 475 to 600 horsepower, and I'm definitely on the lower side of that. So I'd prefer to keep the injection maybe not all the way at 100%. It'll probably inject at about maybe 70% at 18 or 19 psi. So you can always play with this after the fact, also depending on your nozzle. I'm going to leave mine here for now. I'm going to do some testing. I'll make another video on what I end up leaving it at, but for now it's going to stay at 25. All right, your power nozzle is if you are running dual injection. If you didn't utilize the yellow wire and a second solenoid to put another nozzle farther back in your system, you always want to have this off. You do not need this if you're not running dual injection. If you're only running single, it stays off. Text color is pretty straightforward. You can just change a couple of colors. I'm going to leave mine on white. And graph color, I'm going to leave mine on red. You can cycle through the same colors you have for the text. And then you can turn your injection on or off. Obviously I'm going to leave mine on because now we're done installing it. And we're back to the home screen. So that's pretty much everything you need to know on this. Wasn't a bad install. I didn't have any real complaints about the kit other than the wires and hose not really being long enough. But I guess for different cars, it could be better or worse. So hopefully this video helped you guys out. If you guys have any questions, you can leave them in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. But that's going to be it for this video. So if you liked it, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.